Rest in peace, Ozzy Osbourne. He was really, really cool and important. Today, I wanted to talk about a few things about Ozzy Osbourne that I actually didn't know until now. He was so cool and so influential. I can't believe it. I think most of us might remember Ozzy Osbourne as the guy with a weird voice in the metal songs and the guy who bit the head off of a bat on stage. But he was so much more. And the people who are more into metal culture will know that. I personally was not super aware. I just know Black Sabbath was a big band, but wow. So he was born in Birmingham, England, 1948. He grew up in a working class family and shared a bedroom with 5 siblings. So 1 bedroom, 6 kids. He had dyslexia, ADD, and got bullied. He just hated school. He was going nowhere fast. But one thing happened that really inspired him, and that was hearing the Beatles' She Loves You, which you cannot hear in his music at all. That's so interesting about inspiration, that something like that, like She Loves You, yeah, 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 can inspire something like Ozzy Osbourne. It's wild. When he was 17, he was in prison for burglary. But he realized when he was there that he was this soft person. He knew he couldn't live a life of crime. He also did something that is now considered iconic, but back then must have been so weird. So while he was in prison, he tattooed Ozzy on his knuckles with a sewing needle. Must have hurt so bad. It's like insane behavior, right? He was such an interesting, weird dude. He makes me think of this guy I used to know back when I was in like primary school. He was the guy who would always wear the shorts and play around with lighters and have a super weird interest. And like, he looked like he was just doing a bunch of weird experiments on his body. I think that's a certain behavior that some kids that are probably neurodivergent exhibit. And honestly, they're the kids you worry about, right? So just Ozzy Osbourne's life is so against all odds, and you will hear even more about how that is true. So later he joined a band with Tony Iommi, I think the name is. They had another name first, but then they renamed it Black Sabbath, and the intention was to make music that sounded like horror films. And now that I know that, I so think that they nailed that. With his eerie voice, like just soaring over the guitars and drums and stuff, they released their debut album on Friday the 13th, 1970. It's so theatrical. Critics really hated it, and fans made it an underground hit. And Black Sabbath really invented heavy metal, or really what we call metal nowadays. But Ozzy wasn't really a songwriter. At some point he said that he couldn't write a song to save his life, but it was more like the medium. He was this crazy person with a crazy voice and crazy stage presence that just made everything work. He didn't write the songs or the riffs or anything like that. Most of the lyrics he didn't write. But yeah, it's just, he's such an icon. A while later though, his self-destructive tendencies became too much for the band. He was on all kinds of drugs and he was fired, and he thought that he wasn't gonna make it. Like, he was just in the deepest hole. But then Sharon Arden, who was the daughter of the manager of their band, of Black Sabbath, found Ozzy spiraling and decided to help him. She believed in him so strongly and became his manager and eventually his wife. And she helps Ozzy rebuild his career and become a solo artist. In his solo project, he started working with this guitarist called Randy Rhoads, and he was this classically trained guitarist who really was good at balancing Ozzy's chaos. You know, everything was all over the place, and he was just super structured and played really cleanly, so that really worked. Their collaboration led to Ozzy's probably biggest solo song called Crazy Train. But then just a couple years later, Rhoads, the guitarist, dies in a plane crash, just a freak plane crash. And Ozzy was entirely devastated. Like, this was a person who was a huge collaborator for him, and he felt like it was finally on the way back up, and he gets this huge grief from losing him. A lot of his music from that time is about Rhoads. He made like a tribute album, all kinds of stuff. But yeah, the fans were really there and like followed this journey of grief and healing. In 1982, which is the same year that Rhoads died, he also mixed up a bat that he thought was plastic, but it was like a real bat. So he bit the head off of a bat on stage, and that's just probably the thing most of us have heard about Ozzy Osbourne. Sharon and Ozzy developed the Prince of Darkness persona. It's kind of like unsettling and humorous and weird. It's very theatrical and has a bunch of weird stage antics, and it's very entertaining. And then later, when he's a dad, when he's way older, in 2002, he reinvents himself, and they have the reality TV show The Osbournes, which it's kind of the original Kardashians, but without the unlikable parts. I remember seeing it on MTV when I was a kid, and it's just really weird. It's like him fighting with a remote control in the TV and being like a grumpy dad that's also this crazy rock star at the same time. It's such an interesting thing, and wow. So the audiences got to see him being vulnerable and weird and like not just chaotic and weird, but he has a huge legacy overall just in metal and the newer forms of metal as well, because he kept being turned down by Lollapalooza and other big festivals like that. So he founded Ozfest back in 1996, and it launched a bunch of metal bands, like the newer metal bands like Slipknot, System of a Down, Linkin Park. Some of these bands might not be like as big or barely exist without Ozfest. So massively, massively influential. He mentored and promoted them and gave them legitimacy, because Ozzy Osbourne's seal of approval was important. It did hold a lot of sway with metal fans. He was really the father figure of metal. He also fought a bunch of health battles, like just looking at his life, he's just so close to dying so many times, either from the drugs or from other things, like, you know, so many near-death experiences. He had an ATV crash where he broke his neck and like a bunch of things with his spine. So his life after that is just so many surgeries and health problems. And then later he also developed Parkinson's. But even as a really rich man and, you know, having all this, having a family, everything else, he refused to retire. He released albums in 2020 and 2022, collaborated with Post Malone, Elton John, Eric Clapton, like very recently. And it seemed like he wanted to be remembered as someone who never gave up, who never wanted to lose his relevance, or he just never wanted to stop. And up until the very end, just a few weeks before he died, he had one of the biggest charity concerts ever. I think they raised like $190 million. All the people of Black Sabbath came back together and did this thing, and so cool. But, you know, recently he hasn't been able to tour. He had to announce that he was not in a physical shape to tour. But even then, he did this type of charity thing, and it was just so freaking successful and awesome. And he's a cool guy, I don't know. And I think it's important to look at Ozzy as just this nice story of someone who had nothing going for him, and then somehow it works out. He met people who believed in him or like wanted to have him in their bands, and then you had the whole thing with Sharon where she believed in him. There's just so many amazing, amazing opportunities that was given to this very, very talented but troubled man. And I think that's something that we can take out of that. Not necessarily that like the power needs to come from within, and if you struggle with stuff and you're not as successful as Ozzy, it's your fault, because I don't think that's true. But I think that we can try to give opportunities to people who might need them, and see people in our lives who might not be living up to their potential, and see that that could be an Ozzy or so on. I think it's a really, really cool story of someone who could just have gone nowhere or died young. So yeah, rest in peace, Ozzy, Prince of Darkness. And yeah, he has such a huge legacy. Amazing. By the way, ask your doctor if TMJ is right for you, and I will see you in the next one.